shattered reflections. The rain poured relentlessly, streaking the windows of the two-story colonial house that once felt like home to Ethan. He stood in the kitchen, the dim light from the range hood casting long shadows across the granite countertops. His eyes were fixed on his wife, Natalie, as she methodically washed the dishes, her movements mechanical, detached. He wondered how long she had been living this lie. Ethan's fingers clenched around his phone, the screen still displaying the damning text message, a single line from an unknown number. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." Attached was a photo of Natalie, her hair tousled, wearing the red dress he had bought her for their anniversary last year. He felt the air leave his lungs, his chest tightening. They had been married for 15 years. They had built a life, a family, memories etched into the walls of this house. How had he missed the signs? Natalie turned, her green eyes meeting his for a fleeting second before she looked away, reaching for another dish. Her silence was deafening. She always knew how to mask her emotions, to bury the truth beneath layers of practiced smiles and feigned cheerfulness. But Ethan saw it now, the weight she carried, the distance she had created. He cleared his throat, his voice breaking the uneasy quiet. "Who is he?" Her body stiffened, the plate slipping from her fingers, shattering against the porcelain sink. The sound echoed through the room, lingering like the unspoken words between them. She didn't turn around. Ethan took a step closer, his hands trembling. "You don't get to lie to me. Not anymore." Natalie's shoulders sagged, and for the first time he saw her mask crack. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. This was a choice." His anger surged, fighting against the grief that threatened to consume him. "How long?" She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the sink. 6 months. Ethan's knees nearly buckled. 6 months. Half a year of deceit, of coming home to her knowing she was giving herself to someone else. He thought about their children, Mia, barely 12, and Noah, just turned 8. Did they suspect? How much of their lives had been tainted by this lie? Do they know? His voice faltered, his eyes searching hers for any sign of remorse. "No." Her reply was swift, almost defensive. "I made sure they didn't." He shook his head, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on him. "Why?" It was the only question he couldn't answer, the one that gnawed at him, refusing to let him breathe. Why him? Why now? Natalie turned to face him, tears brimming in her eyes. "I was lonely, Ethan. You were always working, always distracted. I felt invisible." Her voice broke, the guilt evident on her face. He saw me." The words cut deeper than any knife. Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. "So this is my fault? Because I worked to provide for this family? Because I trusted you?" "No, I'm not blaming you. I'm trying to make you understand." Her tears spilled over, her shoulders shaking. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did." His voice was cold, emotionless. "You shattered everything." They stood there, the distance between them growing, the chasm that could never be bridged. Ethan turned away, his eyes falling on the family photos that lined the hallway. Vacations, birthdays, holidays, all moments he once believed were real. Now, they felt tainted, broken pieces of a life he no longer recognized. He felt his phone vibrate in his hand, another message from the unknown number. This time it read, "Did you tell him yet? We need to figure this out." His blood ran cold. It wasn't over. There were more lies, more secrets. He turned back to Natalie, his voice low, laced with anger. "Are you pregnant?" Her eyes widened, panic flooding her face. Her silence was all the confirmation he needed. Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him, the world spinning. He stumbled back, his hand gripping the wall for support. "Is it mine?" Natalie's lips trembled, her face pale. "I don't know." He wanted to scream, to break everything around him, to make her feel the pain that tore through him. But all he could do was stare at her, the woman he once loved, the woman who had destroyed him. "Get out," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I can't look at you right now." Natalie's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her coat, her keys, and walked out the door, leaving Ethan alone with the shattered pieces of his life. He sank to the floor, his back against the wall, his hands shaking. He didn't know how to move forward, how to piece together the fragments of his broken heart. He didn't know if forgiveness was possible, or if revenge would only consume him. The rain continued to fall, its steady rhythm the only sound in the empty house. And as Ethan sat there, drowning in betrayal, Shattered Reflections, Part 2. Ethan didn't move for hours. His body felt heavy, his mind trapped in a loop, replaying Natalie's confession over and over. 6 months. The woman he trusted, the woman he built his life with, had been lying to him for 6 months. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the pain that clawed at his chest. A knock at the door shattered the silence. He jolted upright, his eyes red, his body stiff. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Maybe she came back, ready to fight for them, for their family. But the thought was crushed as quickly as it came. What was there left to fight for? He opened the door to find his younger brother, Lucas, standing on the porch, his expression twisted with concern. "I've been calling you all night. What's going on?" Ethan's mouth was dry, the words tangled in his throat. He opened the door wider, letting Lucas in without saying a word. They moved to the living room, a place that once felt warm and safe. Now, it was just a room filled with memories of a life built on lies. Lucas sat on the couch, his eyes narrowing as he took in his brother's hollow gaze, the mess of broken dishes in the kitchen. "Did something happen?" Ethan laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. "You could say that." He tossed his phone onto the coffee table, the incriminating message still visible. Lucas picked up the phone, his jaw tightening as he read the text. "Who the hell is this?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Ethan's voice was cold, detached. 6 months. She's been seeing him for 6 months. He sank into the armchair, his shoulders slumped. "She doesn't even know who the father is." Lucas's face hardened, his hands balling into fists. "Are you serious? I never would have thought... Natalie?" Ethan looked away, his chest tightening. "Yeah, I thought the same thing." They sat in silence, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on them. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice low, cautious. "What are you going to do?" Ethan stared at the family photos on the wall, his heart aching. He had spent years building this life, protecting it, cherishing it. He didn't know how to walk away, but he didn't know how to stay either. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I want to hate her. I want to scream, break things, make her feel what I'm feeling. But she's still the mother of my kids. How do I destroy the woman they love?" Lucas's face softened, his anger giving way to empathy. "You don't. You find a way to get through this. For them." He hesitated, then added, "And for yourself." Ethan's eyes stung, the tears he fought so hard to hold back threatening to spill. "I don't even know who I am without her." Lucas leaned forward, his voice firm. "You're still you, and no matter what happens, you'll find a way through this." Ethan wanted to believe him, but the pain was too raw, the wounds too fresh. He didn't know if he could ever forgive her, or if revenge would only make him feel emptier. He didn't know if reconciliation was even possible, or if trust could be rebuilt from the ashes of this betrayal. The front door creaked open, and Ethan's heart stopped. Natalie stood in the doorway, her eyes swollen, her face pale. She looked like a ghost of the woman he once loved. Lucas stood up, his expression hardening. "You've got some nerve showing up here." "I need to talk to Ethan," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Alone?" Lucas looked at his brother, his jaw clenched. "You want me to stay?" Ethan shook his head, his eyes never leaving Natalie's. "No, I need to do this." Lucas hesitated, his gaze lingering on Natalie. Then he turned and walked out, giving his brother's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before leaving. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Natalie took a step forward, her hands trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I broke us, broke you. But I need you to understand why." Ethan's eyes burned with anger, his voice cold. "I don't want to hear your excuses." "It's not an excuse." Her voice wavered, her shoulders shaking. I'm trying to explain how I lost myself." She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with tears. "After Mia was born, I gave up everything. My career, my dreams, my identity. I became mom, and I lost who I was. You think that justifies what you did?" His voice was sharp, his pain bleeding into every word. "You could have talked to me. We could have fixed it, but you chose him." "I was scared," she cried, her voice breaking. "I was scared you wouldn't understand, that you'd think I was selfish for wanting more. I felt trapped. And he made me feel free." Ethan's heart twisted, a new kind of pain flooding through him. He had failed her, too. In his quest to be the perfect provider, he had missed the cracks forming beneath the surface. But that didn't absolve her of what she did. It didn't erase the betrayal. Who is he? His voice was low, strained. "I deserve to know who ruined my family." Days bled into nights, and the world moved on, indifferent to Ethan's shattered existence. He went through the motions, getting the kids ready for school, showing up to work, pretending that everything was fine. But inside, he was a hollow shell, his heart numb, his mind stuck on a loop of questions that had no answers. He avoided Natalie as much as possible. She stayed at her sister's house, only coming by to pick up the kids or drop them off. Their interactions were painfully civil, short and impersonal, like strangers sharing a burden neither of them wanted. Ethan couldn't bear to look at her. Every time he did, he saw her with him, the faceless man who had taken everything from him. Sometimes he wondered if he'd lost her long before she cheated, if the life they built had been a lie all along. The questions haunted him, echoing through his mind as he lay awake at night, staring at the empty space beside him. He hadn't touched her pillow since she left. Her scent was still there, faint but unmistakable, a cruel reminder of what he had lost. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan found himself scrolling through her social media, searching for clues he'd missed, signs that had been right in front of him. He looked at pictures from months ago, Natalie smiling at a work event, the light in her eyes dimmer than he remembered. Was he there? The man she chose over him? Was he the one behind the camera, making her smile the way she used to smile at him? Ethan's chest tightened, his hands trembling as he set the phone down, fighting the urge to throw it across the room. He didn't know how to stop torturing himself, how to escape the relentless ache of betrayal. He needed answers. Closure. Something to make sense of the chaos inside him. The next morning, he called Lucas. "I need your help," he said, his voice rough from sleepless nights. "I need to know who he is." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Say no more. I'll see what I can find out." It didn't take long. Lucas called him back that evening, his voice cautious. "His name's Adam Weston. He's in marketing, works at her company." The name hit Ethan, like a punch to the gut. He'd heard it before, in passing, back when Natalie would tell him about her day. She always spoke so fondly of him, praising his creativity, his charm. Ethan had never thought twice about it. He'd trusted her. He swallowed the bile rising in his throat, his hands shaking. Does he know about me? About the kids? Lucas hesitated. Yeah. He's been married before, divorced now, no kids. I don't know if he thought she'd leave you, but it sounds like it was serious. Ethan's blood ran cold. Serious. Was she in love with him? Did she ever love Ethan? At all? Thanks, he muttered, his voice hollow. I needed to know. After hanging up, Ethan stood in the living room, his heart pounding. He imagined confronting Adam, looking him in the eye and demanding to know why he destroyed his family. But what would that accomplish? It wouldn't bring back the trust that had been shattered. It wouldn't erase the image of Natalie in another man's arms. He paced the room, his anger boiling over. He wanted to hurt him, to make him pay for what he did. But as the anger ebbed, it was replaced by a crushing sense of helplessness. The damage was done. No amount of revenge would change that. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Natalie. Can we talk, please? I need to explain. He almost ignored it, but his fingers moved on their own, typing a response before he could stop himself. Fine. Come over tonight. After the kids are asleep. He stared at the screen, his heart racing. Why was he giving her the chance to hurt him again? Maybe he needed to hear it from her, to understand why she did it, how she could betray him so easily. Maybe he was just a fool, desperate for answers he'd never get. When Natalie arrived, she looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her eyes swollen. She hesitated in the doorway, her gaze flickering to his face before dropping to the floor. Thank you for letting me come. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the wall, keeping his distance. Say what you need to say. Natalie swallowed, her hands trembling. I didn't come here to justify what I did. There's no excuse for it. But I need you to know. I never stopped loving you. He scoffed, the bitterness spilling out, before he could stop it. You've got a funny way of showing it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I was lonely, Ethan. I felt invisible. You were always working, always focused on providing. And I know that was for us, but I felt like I was just a part of the routine, like I didn't matter. Her voice broke, her shoulders shaking. And Adam, he made me feel seen. Ethan's heart twisted, guilt mingling with anger. Had he really made her feel that way? Had he been so focused on being the perfect husband that he'd forgotten to be her partner? But that didn't change what she did. It didn't excuse the lies, the betrayal. Ethan didn't sleep that night. His mind raced with questions, fears, and memories. Could he truly forgive Natalie? Could he learn to trust her again? Was love enough to heal the wounds she'd inflicted? The next morning, he stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. He looked older, worn down, his eyes haunted by sleepless nights and shattered dreams. But beneath the pain, he saw determination. He owed it to himself to find closure, one way or another. He texted Natalie, asking her to meet him at the park where they used to take the kids on weekends. She agreed. And a few hours later, he stood by the bench where they had once watched their children play, his heart heavy with anticipation. Natalie arrived, her face pale, eyes rimmed with dark circles. She looked fragile, as if a single harsh word could break her. For a moment, Ethan's anger resurfaced, but then he remembered the message she sent, her vulnerability, her willingness to fight for them. They stood in silence, the weight of their history pressing down on them. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice cold but steady. Why? Natalie's shoulders sagged, her gaze dropping to the ground. I was lost, she whispered. I was unhappy, and I didn't know how to tell you. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. I was selfish. I made the worst mistake of my life. Ethan's jaw tightened. So, you turned to him? She looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. It was never about him. It was about me. My insecurities, my fear of growing old, my need to feel wanted. It was a lie, Ethan. It meant nothing, but it destroyed everything. He felt his chest tighten, the pain flaring up again. You should have talked to me. We could have worked through it. Together. I know, she choked out, wiping at her tears. I was a coward. I thought I was protecting you, protecting our family. But all I did was break us. Ethan turned away, his eyes burning as he looked out at the playground. He watched the children laughing, running free, unaware of the pain that came with adulthood. Do they know? He asked, his voice cracking. Do they know why we're broken? Natalie shook her head. No, they just think we're having problems. I didn't want them to hate me, to hate us. They deserve better, Ethan said, his shoulders sagging. We owe them the truth. One day, when they're old enough to understand. I'll do whatever you need me to do, she promised. If you want me to leave, I'll go. If you want to try, I'll do anything. But I can't stand this limbo. I can't stand knowing I hurt you and not being able to fix it. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her. She was broken too. Broken by her own choices, by the guilt she carried, by the love she had betrayed. And despite everything, despite the pain, he still loved her. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. I don't know how to move past this, he admitted, his voice raw. I don't know how to look at you and not see him, not see what you did. Natalie's face crumbled, the tears flowing freely. I know. And I'm so sorry, Ethan. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is try to be better, to be the woman you deserve, if you'll let me. He closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He wanted to forgive her, to find a way to rebuild their life. But he also wanted to protect himself, to guard his heart from the pain she had caused. I need time, he said finally. Time to figure out if I can live with this, if I can forgive you. Natalie nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. He looked away, his emotions tangled and raw. I can't promise anything, but I'll try. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out before she pulled it back, uncertain. Thank you, Ethan, for giving us a chance. He didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the children playing, their laughter echoing through the park. He wondered if they could ever be that happy again, innocent, untainted by betrayal. As Natalie walked away, he felt the first stirrings of hope mingling with his pain. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. Ethan stayed at the park long after she left, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if they could rebuild what was broken. But for the first time since his world fell apart, he felt the possibility of healing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Ethan returned home to the echoing emptiness of the house. The silence weighed on him, pressing down on his chest. This was the home they had built together, filled with memories of laughter, birthdays, and late-night whispers. Now, every corner felt haunted by the shadows of betrayal. He wandered through the living room, his fingers grazing the framed photographs on the mantel. Their wedding day, Natalie's smile so bright, so full of promise, vacations at the beach, the kids splashing. In the waves, pure joy on their faces. Family dinners, captured in candid moments of love. All of it felt tainted now, like a cruel mockery of the life he thought they had. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. He wanted to scream, to break something, to lash out at the unfairness of it all. But all he could do was sit there, numb and exhausted. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of the fog. A message from his sister, Julia. Thinking of you. Let me know if you need anything. Julia had always been his rock, the one who never judged, who listened without interrupting. He hesitated before typing. Can you come over? I need someone to talk to. Within an hour, Julia was there, her presence filling the house with warmth. She wrapped him in a hug, holding him tight. He let himself sink into her embrace, letting his guard down for the first time in days. They sat in the kitchen, mugs of tea growing cold on the table. Ethan spoke in halting sentences, his voice cracking as he recounted everything, finding the messages, the confrontation, Natalie's confession. Julia listened, her eyes brimming with empathy. I can't believe she did this to you, to your family. God, Ethan, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his hands trembling. I still love her, but I hate her too. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Julia reached across the table, squeezing his hand. You don't have to decide right now. Take your time. It's okay to be angry, to grieve, even to forgive her, if that's what you want. Ethan looked away, his jaw clenching. Forgiveness feels impossible. She destroyed everything, and the worst part is, I never saw it coming. Julia's expression darkened. You deserved better. But if you ever decide you want to work things out, that doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human. He let her words sink in, the weight of them heavy on his heart. I told her I needed time. I don't even know if that's true, or if I just didn't want to say goodbye. Julia's eyes softened. Whatever happens, I'm here for you. You don't have to go through this alone. Ethan nodded, his throat tight with gratitude. Thanks, Jules. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled sadly. You're stronger than you think. And no matter what you decide, you'll get through this. After Julia left, the house felt a little less empty. But as night fell, the familiar ache returned, gnawing at his heart. Ethan wandered into the bedroom, standing at the doorway, hesitant. The bed they once shared now felt like a battleground, stained by broken promises. His gaze fell on Natalie's pillow, still faintly carrying her scent. He picked it up, his fingers curling into the fabric as anger surged through him. He wanted to throw it, to rip it apart, to purge every trace of her. But instead, he sank to his knees, clutching the pillow as tears he had been holding back finally broke free. His sobs echoed through the room, raw and unrestrained. He mourned, not just the betrayal, but the loss of everything they once were. The next morning, he woke on the floor, his body stiff and aching. He dragged himself up, forcing himself through the motions, showering, getting dressed, making breakfast he couldn't stomach. He was sipping cold coffee when his phone buzzed again. This time, it was from an unknown number. We need to talk. It's about Natalie. It's important. His heart skipped a beat. Who was this? What could they possibly know about Natalie? He hesitated before typing. Who is this? A reply came almost instantly. Someone who thought they were the only one. Ethan's blood ran cold, the room spinning as the implications sank in. Another affair? Another secret? He dropped his phone, his hands shaking. Everything he thought he knew was crumbling around him, revealing darker truths he was nowhere near, ready to face. He stared at the message, his heart pounding. The pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty. It wasn't over. Not yet. And he wasn't sure he could survive another blow. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up the phone again, his pulse racing. Who was this person? Another affair? Another lie? His mind spun, replaying every conversation, every glance, every seemingly innocent smile Natalie had ever given him. He typed, What do you mean? Who are you? And hit send before he could second-guess himself. 3 dots danced on the screen before the reply came. My name is Daniel. I was with Natalie until she disappeared on me. I thought I was the only one she was lying to. Ethan's grip tightened, his knuckles turning white. Disappeared? Was she hiding more than just infidelity? Was she lying to Daniel the way she had lied to him? How deep did her deception go? His first instinct was to throw the phone, to smash it against the wall and pretend this wasn't happening. But the anger was quickly replaced by cold curiosity. He needed answers. He needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He typed back, "Where did you last see her?" Daniel responded almost immediately. "A motel off Highway 9. She said she needed space to think, that her marriage was suffocating her. I haven't heard from her since." Ethan's stomach churned. Highway 9 was a desolate stretch far away from their home. What was she doing there? Was this just another rendezvous spot, or was something more sinister at play? He stared at the message, his mind piecing together the fragments of Natalie's deceit. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about who Natalie truly was, someone he clearly didn't know at all. He made a decision. He had to go to that motel. He had to see it for himself, to confront the reality of her betrayal, even if it shattered him further, grabbing his keys. He drove in a haze, his emotions swirling between rage and despair. The landscape blurred by, the road stretching endlessly before him. The motel appeared on the horizon, a run-down relic with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. It looked like the kind of place people went to when they wanted to be forgotten. Ethan's chest tightened as he pulled into the gravel lot. He sat in the car for a moment, his fingers gripping the steering wheel, his heart pounding. He could still turn back, could still pretend he didn't know about any of this. But he was tired of pretending. He stepped out of the car, the air cold against his skin. His eyes scanned the numbered doors, trying to imagine Natalie here, with someone else, spinning her web of lies. The manager was a grizzled man behind a smudged glass window, his eyes narrowing as Ethan approached. "Need a room?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm looking for someone, a woman named Natalie. She might have been here recently." The manager's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered with recognition. "Lot of people come through. Here. What's it to you?" "She's my wife," Ethan admitted, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. The man sighed, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Room 12. She stayed there a few days, left in a hurry, didn't even check out." Ethan's heart dropped. "Did you see who she was with?" The man shrugged. "Couple of times, different guys. Didn't ask questions. Not my business." The ground felt like it was shifting beneath Ethan's feet. Different guys? How many lies had she told? How many lives had she been living? He forced himself to nod. "Can I see the room?" The manager hesitated before tossing him a key. "I haven't cleaned it yet. Been busy. Knock yourself out." Room 12 was at the end of the row, its door chipped and weathered. Ethan stood there, key in hand, his heart hammering in his chest. Did he really want to see this? Did he want to face the proof of her betrayal? He slid the key into the lock, the door creaking as it swung open. The room was musty, the bed unmade, sheets tangled and stained. An empty wine bottle sat on the nightstand, lipstick smeared on the rim, but it was the faint scent of her perfume that hit him the hardest, lingering in the stale air, a cruel reminder of the intimacy they once shared. He moved through the room like a ghost, his fingers grazing the pillow, the discarded clothing in the corner. A notebook lay on the dresser, the pages scribbled with handwriting he knew too well. Flipping through, he found fragments of her thoughts. "I feel trapped. I don't know who I am anymore. I never meant to hurt him, but I can't stop." Each line cut deeper than the last. She had been spiraling, lost and confused. But instead of turning to him, she had run into the arms of strangers, seeking solace in deception. His knees buckled, and he sank onto the bed, his hands shaking. How could she do this? How could she destroy everything they built, everything they were? His phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. I deserve answers too. Meet me tomorrow at the cafe on 5th. Noon. Ethan stared at the screen, his mind swirling with questions. Could Daniel fill in the gaps? Could he help him understand why Natalie had shattered their lives? The cafe on 5th was quaint and unassuming, its worn wooden tables crowded with mismatched chairs. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries, but Ethan's stomach churned too much to even consider ordering anything. He spotted Daniel immediately, a tall man with disheveled dark hair and tired eyes, dressed in a worn leather jacket. He looked as shattered as Ethan felt, his shoulders hunched, fingers nervously drumming on the table. Ethan hesitated at the entrance, his heart thudding. What was he doing here? Was this just self-torture? But he needed to know. He needed to piece together the person Natalie had become, the one who had broken them both. He walked over, each step heavy. Daniel looked up, his eyes widening as he took in Ethan's face. You must be her husband? Ethan nodded, sitting down across from him. Yeah, and you're her boyfriend? The word tasted sour in his mouth. Daniel scoffed, bitterness lacing his voice. I don't know what I was to her. Clearly not much. The two men sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of their shared betrayal pressing down. Finally, Ethan broke the tension. How did you meet her? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. At a gallery downtown. She was magnetic. Confident, charming, said she was trapped in a loveless marriage but couldn't find the courage to leave. I fell for it. He looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. Guess I was just another escape for her. Ethan's chest tightened. Hearing the story from someone else made it more real, more devastating. Did she ever talk? About me? Daniel hesitated, his jaw clenching. She said you were distant, that you didn't see her anymore, that you didn't love her. He looked down, guilt shadowing his face. I believed her. Thought I was rescuing her from a prison. A cold laugh escaped Ethan's lips. Prison? I gave her everything. We built a life together. I thought we were happy. Daniel's expression softened. I'm sorry. I didn't know. She made it sound like she was suffocating, like she was already gone. He looked Ethan in the eye, his voice low. I didn't know she was lying to both of us. Ethan's anger wavered, replaced by a hollow ache. They were both victims of her deception, two fools who had fallen for her web of lies. Did she love you? He asked, his voice cracking. Daniel looked away, pain evident in his eyes. I thought so. She said she did. But I don't know if any of it was real. She disappeared without a word, like I never mattered. So, words echoed Ethan's own fears. Had he ever mattered to her? Had any of their life been real? Or was it all just a facade? Daniel cleared his throat, his voice trembling. I found something in her bag before she left. It's why I reached out to you. He pulled out a crumpled envelope and slid it across the table. I think you should see this. Ethan stared at the envelope, his name written in her familiar handwriting. His hands shook as he opened it, his eyes scanning the letter inside. Ethan, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to be the woman you fell in love with. I'm broken, lost, and I've been running from myself for so long that I've dragged you down with me. You deserve better than the lies I've built around us. You deserve someone who isn't haunted by doubt, someone who can love you the way you deserve. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. I'm sorry for everything. Maybe one day, You'll forgive me, but I can't forgive myself. Goodbye, Natalie. Ethan's vision blurred, his heart shattering all over again. She was gone. She had walked away, leaving behind nothing but questions and a hollow apology. He looked up, his eyes meeting Daniel's. She never said goodbye to you, did she? Daniel shook his head, pain etched into his features. No. I was just another chapter she closed without looking back. They sat in silence, two broken men connected by the same woman who had destroyed them. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat, his anger fading into grief. I thought I knew her. I thought we were forever. Daniel's voice was quiet, resigned. So did I. Ethan stood up, his legs unsteady. I need to go. I need to figure out how to live without her. He hesitated, his voice softening. I hope you find peace, Daniel. I really do. Daniel nodded, his shoulders slumping. You too. Ethan walked out of the cafe, the cold air biting at his skin. He felt hollow, empty, like a part of him had been ripped away. Natalie was gone, lost in her own chaos, and he was left to pick up the pieces. He looked at the letter one last time before crumpling it in his fist. There were no answers here, no closure. Only a woman who had been broken long before she ever broke him. He didn't know if he could forgive her. He didn't know if he could ever stop loving her. But he did know one thing. He had to find a way to move on, even if it meant leaving behind the only woman he had ever truly loved. The days that followed were a haze. Ethan went through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, yet everything felt mechanical, devoid of meaning. The house was too quiet, haunted by echoes of laughter and whispered conversations that were now tainted with lies. Natalie was everywhere and nowhere all at once. Her perfume lingered on her pillow. Her shoes were still neatly lined by the door, and her favorite coffee mug sat in the sink, untouched since the morning she left. He hadn't moved any of her things. He couldn't. It felt too final, too real. He found himself obsessively rereading her letter, searching for clues between the lines. Where had she gone? Why had she done this to them? But no answers came. Just the same hollow words that only deepened his pain. On the fourth night, he lay awake in their bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed every memory he had of her, every smile, every touch, every promise. Had it all been a lie? Was she just pretending even then? The doubt was suffocating. He sat up, his heart racing, and reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over her contact, his pulse thundering in his ears. He needed to hear her voice, to demand answers, to scream and yell and make her feel the pain she had caused. But he stopped himself. She wouldn't pick up. And even if she did, what could she possibly say that would make this better? His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from Daniel. I thought you should see this. It was on her social media. A link followed. Ethan's heart plummeted as he clicked it. It led to a photo, a beach at sunset, golden hues reflecting off the waves. But it wasn't the scenery that shattered him. It was the caption. Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find who you really are. New beginnings. Freedom posted just hours ago. He stared at the screen, his vision blurring. She was out there, enjoying herself, embracing her so-called freedom while he was drowning in her betrayal. It felt like a slap to the face. He threw his phone across the room, hearing it shatter against the wall. Anger surged through him, hot and vicious, burning away the sorrow. How dare she? How dare she walk away like he meant nothing? Like their life together was just a chapter she could close without a second thought? Ethan stood up, his hands shaking. He needed to do something, anything, to channel the rage that was consuming him. Without thinking, he grabbed his car keys and stormed out the door. He drove aimlessly, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Her face flashed in his mind, smiling, laughing, crying, lying. Every memory felt poisoned now, every happy moment tainted by her deceit. He found himself outside her sister's house, the place Natalie had always run to when she needed to clear her head. He pounded on the door, his heart racing. Samantha opened it, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ethan, it's late. Is everything okay?" "Where is she?" His voice was cold, sharp. "Where's Natalie?" Samantha's face fell, guilt flickering in her eyes. I don't know." "Don't lie to me, Sam. You've always covered for her. You must know where she went." She looked away, her shoulders slumping. "I haven't heard from her. I swear." But her voice wavered, and Ethan's blood ran cold. "You're lying." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm not. I'm just as lost as you are. She hasn't reached out. She just disappeared." Ethan's anger deflated, replaced by a sinking dread. "Did you know?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Did you know she was cheating on me?" Samantha's expression shattered. I suspected, but I didn't want to believe it. She's my sister. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt." Her tears fell freely now. "I never meant for you to get hurt." Ethan turned away, his chest tightening. "She's out there somewhere, living her new beginning while I'm left to pick up the pieces. How could she do this to us?" Samantha hugged herself, her face pale. "I don't know. She's always been running from something. Even before you, maybe she finally ran too far." The words chilled him. What was Natalie running from? What was she hiding? He looked back at Samantha. "If she reaches out, if she tells you anything, promise me you'll tell me." She hesitated before nodding. "I promise." Ethan turned to leave, his heart heavy. But as he reached his car, Samantha's voice stopped him. "Ethan, be careful. Sometimes the truth is worse than the lies." He didn't respond. He couldn't. Because he was beginning to realize that he didn't just want answers. He needed them, no matter how painful they were. As he drove away, the image of the sunset on Natalie's post haunted him, taunting him with the life she was living without him. But a new determination burned in his chest. He was done being the victim. He was done letting her control his life, even from afar. If she wanted to disappear, he would find her. If she wanted to keep secrets, he would uncover them. No more lies, no more running. The days blurred together, each one more agonizing than the last. Ethan couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that he was running out of time, that whatever it was Natalie was hiding would slip further away the longer he waited. The feeling of helplessness consumed him, twisting his insides. He had no idea where she was or what she was doing. But one thing was clear. She had made her choice, and now he had to make his. Ethan didn't sleep much anymore. At night, he lay awake, replaying every conversation, every glance, every touch. That had once felt like security. Had she always been hiding pieces of herself from him? Was their love nothing more than an illusion, a carefully constructed act to cover up her secrets? One night, as he sat in the dim glow of his living room, staring at the empty chair across from him, his phone buzzed. His pulse quickened as he saw it was a message from Samantha. She reached out. "I don't know how to tell you this, but she's asking about you." Ethan's breath caught. The flood of emotions hit him all at once. Fear, anger, confusion, and hope. He had to see her. He needed to face her, to demand the truth once and for all. The message continued. "She's at her old friend's place in the city. I don't know what she wants, but she says she needs to talk to you." Ethan didn't waste a second. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The city was a blur as he drove, the streets unfamiliar, the headlights streaking past like ghosts. His mind raced with 1,000 questions. What was Natalie going to say? Was she going to apologize? Was this her attempt at reconciliation? Or was this just another part of the lie she had been living? His car screeched to a halt in front of an old brownstone. He recognized the address immediately. It was one of the places Natalie used to stay with her college friend, Elena. He took a deep breath before stepping out of the car, the cool air biting at his skin. As he approached the door, his fingers trembled on the handle. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he couldn't stop himself. The door creaked open before he could knock. Elena stood there, her face unreadable, as though she had been waiting for him. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. He didn't respond. He couldn't. He just needed to see Natalie. Elena led him down a narrow hallway into a living room that looked as though it hadn't changed since college. It smelled of incense and old books, a strange sense of nostalgia clinging to the air. Natalie was sitting on the couch, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked so different, like a ghost of the woman he had once loved. Ethan's heart thudded painfully in his chest. This was it. He had finally found her. "Ethan," Natalie said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look up at him. "I've been waiting for you." He didn't know what to say. Anger churned in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of betrayal. She had asked for this meeting, but what did she expect from him? What did she want? He finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "You've been waiting for me. You disappeared without a trace, Natalie. You left me to wonder where the hell you went, and now you're telling me you've been waiting for me?" She finally looked up at him, her eyes hollow, tired. "I'm sorry," she said, though the words seemed empty, like she didn't even believe them herself. "I never meant for things to get this complicated. I was running, Ethan. Running from myself, from the life we had. I needed space. I needed to find something, but I didn't think about how it would affect you." Ethan's chest tightened. The words felt rehearsed, too neat. Was she being honest? Or was this just another lie to cover up what she had done? "So, you run off with your lover, abandon your life, and then what? You show up here and expect me to understand?" His voice was rising now, the raw emotion spilling out. "What about everything we built? What about us?" Natalie's eyes welled with tears. "I know I hurt you, Ethan. I know I destroyed everything. I never wanted this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing for me. But now I see it was selfish." "You thought you were doing the right thing," he repeated, disbelief cutting through his words. "Leaving me? Lying to me for months? Telling me we had a future while you were sleeping with someone else?" "Ethan, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I was lost. I was so lost. And I thought maybe I could find myself again by leaving, by starting over. But I was wrong. I've been wrong about everything. I couldn't be the person you needed me to be." The pain in her voice hit him harder than he expected. There was sincerity there. But could he believe it? Could he forgive her for everything she had done? Ethan stood there, torn. A part of him wanted to shout, to demand more answers. The drive back home was long, silent, and filled with a haze of confusion. Ethan's thoughts were a tangled mess of frustration, anger, and a kind of hollow sorrow that he didn't have the words for. Every mile he passed felt like another weight. On his chest, another step further away from the man he once was. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on him as he entered, the silence louder than ever before. He slumped onto the couch, his hands running through his hair. He had seen Natalie. He had heard her apology, felt the raw pain in her voice, but nothing had been resolved. Nothing felt any clearer. He thought he would feel something more profound, anger, relief, even satisfaction. But all he felt was an aching void. It wasn't just about her affair. It was about the years they had spent together, the life they had built, and the lie that had slowly festered between them. How had he never seen it? How had they gotten to this point? As he stared blankly at the wall, his phone buzzed. It was Samantha. "You okay?" Ethan's fingers hovered over the screen. How could he even begin to explain what he was feeling? Samantha had been there through everything. His anger, his frustration, the investigation. But this was different. It wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about the kind of grief that wrapped itself around you, that choked the air from your lungs and left you with nothing but questions. "I saw her," Ethan typed back, his thumb heavy on the screen. "I don't know what to do now." Seconds ticked by before her reply came. "Do you want to talk?" He sat back, staring at the message. He could talk to her. He could pour everything out, his pain, his anger, his guilt. Samantha had always been someone who understood, even when words failed him. But this wasn't just a conversation. This wasn't just the aftermath of a betrayal. This was the final chapter of a life that had been broken beyond repair. Instead of replying, he put the phone down and grabbed the bottle of whiskey he kept in the cabinet. He needed something to numb the ache, to drown the noise in his head. He poured a glass and sat in the dark, staring at the empty room. The life he had imagined, the future he had built with Natalie, all seemed so distant now. Hours passed, and the whiskey began to do its job. His thoughts blurred, and his vision swam in and out of focus. But just as he started to drift into the numbness, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Elena. His stomach churned. Elena had always been the one who kept him grounded during the worst of their fights. She had known Natalie better than anyone, and yet every time they spoke, there was always a sense of distance, a kind of unspoken tension. Reluctantly, Ethan answered. "Ethan?" Elena's voice was soft, hesitant. "I know you're hurting, but I need you to listen to me. This isn't over." Ethan sat up straighter, a sharp edge of frustration creeping into his tone. "What do you mean it's not over? I saw her. She apologized. She said she was sorry. But it's just words, Elena. Words don't fix this." "Elena," she interrupted, her voice firmer now. "This isn't about just the affair. I don't know if you realize this, but there's more going on here. I've known something was off for a while, and I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to make things worse. But I think you need to know." Ethan's heart stopped, the words hitting him like a punch to the gut. More? What could be worse than what he already knew? "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low, betraying a tremor of dread. "Elena," she continued, "Natalie has been carrying a secret for years, a secret that goes deeper than the affair. It has to do with someone in her past, someone she's been hiding from you. I don't know everything, but it's something that could change everything." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. What did she mean? Someone in her past? What was Elena hinting at? "Elena, what are you saying?" There was a long pause, and Ethan could hear her breathing on the other end. "I don't know all the details, but I think you should look into it. If you really want the truth, you need to keep digging. It's not just about the affair. It's something bigger, something she hasn't told you." The words hung in the air like a bomb about to detonate. Ethan felt a wave of nausea rise in his chest, but there was also a flicker of something else, a twisted sense of purpose. "Where do I start?" he asked, his voice steady now, though his insides were churning. Elena hesitated. "I'll send you something. It's not much, but it might help. Just be careful, Ethan. This isn't something you can undo once you know." The call ended, and Ethan sat in the silence that followed, his mind racing. More? How could there possibly be more? He picked up his phone and stared at it for a moment, his thoughts a jumbled mess of emotions. The hours ticked by slowly as Ethan sat in his darkened apartment, staring at the phone in his hand. Elena's words reverberated in his mind. It's something bigger. He didn't know what that meant, but the urgency in her voice suggested that it was something he needed to understand, something that could break apart what was left of his already fractured world. He glanced at the bottle of whiskey, but the sting of the liquor wasn't enough to dull the knot tightening in his chest. He couldn't keep drinking away the pain. Not now. Not when there was something pulling him toward an unknown truth. His mind buzzed, sharp and unrelenting. Finally, his phone buzzed again. Elena had sent a message. It was brief. Check the envelope in the drawer. It has her name on it. I don't know everything, but you'll find answers there. Be careful. Ethan rose from the couch, his legs heavy with the weight of what was coming. The drawer in the kitchen, a place where they'd kept all the mundane documents, receipts, bills, things that had never mattered. He opened it, his fingers trembling as he sifted through the clutter. And there, tucked beneath an old stack of papers, was an envelope, plain and simple, with Natalie's name written in shaky, unfamiliar handwriting. He felt his heart race as he opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The words were typed, no return address, just a short message. Natalie's past is darker than you think. She's involved with someone dangerous, someone who has ties you don't want to know about. She's been hiding from this person for years. Watch your back. Don't trust her. E. Ethan stared at the paper, his vision blurring as the truth began to settle in. Someone dangerous. Ties he didn't want to know about. This wasn't just about an affair. It was something deeper, something more sinister. His thoughts raced. Who was this person? Why hadn't Natalie told him? And what kind of danger had she led him into without him even knowing? He felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. The betrayal, it seemed, wasn't just about cheating. It wasn't even just about the lies. It was about something bigger, something darker that had been lurking beneath the surface of their life together. And now, it was about to swallow him, whole. Ethan sank back into the chair, the paper still gripped tightly in his hand. His thoughts flickered to Natalie. She'd been distant lately, but how could he have missed this? How could he have missed the signs of something this dangerous? Something this deadly? She hadn't just betrayed him in a typical way. She'd been hiding an entire secret life, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized he didn't know her at all. He didn't know who she was, not really. Everything he thought he knew had been a lie. The air in the apartment felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on him. He needed to find out more. But where to begin? What kind of person had his wife been hiding from him all these years? His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Samantha. He let it ring for a moment, unsure of whether he wanted to answer, but finally he swiped the screen. What's going on? Samantha's voice was soft, but he could hear the concern in her tone. I got something, Ethan muttered, his mind spinning. Something big. It's not just the affair. There's something else going on, something dark. His words faltered, the weight of it all crashing down on him. What do you mean? Samantha asked, her voice growing urgent. What is it? He let out a shaky breath, glancing at the envelope on the table in front of him. I don't know yet, but someone she's been involved with is dangerous. I think she's been hiding it from me for years. Samantha was quiet. For a moment, then she spoke again, her tone serious. You need to be careful, Ethan. Whatever this is, it's bigger than just you and her. You need to figure out who you're dealing with before it's too late. I know, he muttered, but I don't know where to start. I don't even know who I'm dealing with. I'll help you, Samantha said firmly. Whatever it takes. You don't have to do this alone. He closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore, Sam. Not even her. I get it, she said, but you can't handle this on your own. Let me help. Ethan looked down at the envelope again. He had no choice. He had to keep digging, had to find out who this person was, and more importantly, why they had been so secretive about it all these years. His pulse quickened as he made a decision. He wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. Natalie's betrayal, her lies, it all meant something deeper, something he couldn't yet understand. But he would. He would uncover the truth, even if it tore everything apart in the process. I'll keep you updated, he said quietly. But I'm going after this. I need to know everything. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every time his eyes closed, flashes of betrayal and fear surged through his mind, mingling with the images of Natalie's smiling face. How could he have missed it? The lie she'd been living. The shadows in her eyes. He felt sick to his stomach, realizing that he had never truly known her. He stared at the envelope, the words, "someone dangerous," echoing through his head. Elena's cryptic warning about Natalie's ties to someone dangerous, and the unsigned message from E. Who was this person? Was it a threat against him? Against Natalie? Was he in more danger than he realized? His phone buzzed again. A message from Samantha. I've been digging. I found a name. Something that might be connected to your wife, Marcus Landon. Used to work in security, connected to some questionable clients. I'll send you the details. Be careful. This is big. Ethan didn't hesitate. He pulled up the file, scanning through it quickly. Marcus Landon. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't place it. He typed the name into his phone's search engine, his heart rate spiking as the results started to surface. Marcus Landon was tied to a number of private security firms, but it was the deeper connections that made Ethan's blood run cold. Landon had been involved in a number of unsolved investigations linked to organized crime, blackmail, and corruption within high-profile corporate circles. Ethan's hand trembled as he read the screen. He wasn't just dealing with some jealous ex-lover or an affair. He was dealing with someone who had dangerous ties to criminal organizations. Natalie had been wrapped up in something he couldn't even fathom. The lies, the secrecy. It wasn't just personal. It was criminal. He quickly typed a message back to Samantha. I need everything on Landon, fast. As he awaited her reply, Ethan's mind raced. What had Natalie gotten herself involved in? How deep did this go? And why hadn't she told him? He thought of her face again, the look of guilt, of fear, when she caught him looking through her. Things. It wasn't just the affair. There was so much more at play, and he was the last to know. His phone buzzed again. Samantha's message was simple. Landon's known for cleaning up messes. If your wife is involved with him, it's bad. He has connections to some dangerous people. I'll be in touch soon. Stay safe. Ethan took a breath, trying to steady himself. He knew he couldn't sit around waiting any longer. He had to confront Natalie. But how would he do it? How would he break the news that he knew? Would she admit everything? Or would she continue to lie? The possibility that she had been part of something this dangerous left him hollow. Could he ever look at her the same way again? He grabbed his coat and headed out the door, determination pushing him forward. There was no turning back now. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about his wife. He had been married to her for years, and yet, how well had he really known her? Had their marriage been built on a foundation of half-truths? Or had she simply grown into someone else, someone he could never fully recognize? He wasn't sure, but the weight of it pressed on him as he headed toward her apartment. The city streets were quiet, the fog rolling in from the bay. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the emptiness as he walked, lost in thought. The world around him felt muted, as though he was walking through a haze. He was out of his depth now, and all he could do was keep moving. As he approached the building, His phone buzzed once more. Another message from Samantha. Found something. Landon's been linked to a private organization called Helix Security. They specialize in protecting high-profile clients at any cost. They're ruthless, Ethan. If she's in this deep, it's more than an affair. She could be in real danger. Watch your back. The words burned into his mind as he entered the lobby of the apartment building. Landon, Helix Security. Everything was starting to add up in a way that left him reeling. This wasn't just an affair. It was a web of deceit, manipulation, and dangerous people. And Natalie had been at the center of it all. He rode the elevator up, his stomach in knots. The door to her apartment was just ahead, and he felt the weight of the confrontation bearing down on him. Would she confess? Or would she lie through her teeth, denying everything until the end? He knocked on the door. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open and Natalie stood in front of him. Her eyes widened when she saw him, her face flushing with a mix of guilt and surprise. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped inside, his gaze scanning the room for any sign of the secrets she'd been hiding. The apartment felt different, darker somehow, like the walls were closing in on him. The room was silent, the tension thick in the air. Ethan stood there, the envelope clenched tightly in his fist, staring at Natalie. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she reached for the edge of the counter to steady herself. He could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she wanted to explain but couldn't find the words. The secret she had been keeping for so long was now unraveling, and she knew there was no escaping it. Finally, she spoke, her voice small, almost breaking. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to get caught up in this. I wanted to protect you. I never wanted this to come out like this." Ethan's pulse raced as he tried to process what she was saying. Protect him? Protect him from what? The reality of the situation hit him harder than any punch. His wife had been living a double life, one that involved criminal elements, shady connections, and worst of all, deceit that had stretched across their entire marriage. He took a step closer, trying to keep his voice controlled, but the hurt leaked through in every word. Protect me? From what exactly? From the truth? From the fact that you've been lying to me for God knows how long? Natalie flinched at the venom in his voice, but she didn't back down. She swallowed hard and then spoke, her eyes never leaving the floor. "I was involved with Marcus Landon. He approached me when we were struggling financially, offering me a way out. I didn't know what I was getting into, Ethan. I thought it was just a business deal. I thought I was helping us, but—" Her voice trailed off. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the pieces began to fit together. The business dealings, the secrets, the meetings she'd always kept hidden from him. It wasn't just infidelity. It was something much darker. "You worked with him?" "Doing what?" he demanded, his voice rising. Her hands shook, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if to hold herself together. "I didn't know the full extent of what Marcus was involved in, but I knew enough. He had connections to people who could make things disappear, people who could erase things. He wanted to use my connections to help him clean up certain situations, legal issues, business deals that went wrong. I never thought it would spiral out of control." Ethan's mind reeled. She had been in over her head, and he hadn't even noticed. She had put herself at the mercy of a man who didn't care about her, who used her like a pawn in some sick game. But worse, she had kept him in the dark, lying to him every step of the way. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, the pain settling deep in his chest. "Why didn't you trust me with this?" "I wanted to," Natalie said, her voice cracking, tears welling in her eyes. "I did. But I was afraid. I was so deep into it, I didn't know how to pull out. I couldn't risk you getting involved. And then, when I started seeing him, it just became easier to keep the lie going. The affair was a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you like that. But Marcus, he's dangerous, Ethan. You don't understand. Ethan didn't know what to say. The betrayal felt like it was suffocating him. His heart and mind were at war, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the one standing before him now, a woman who had lied, deceived, and gotten entangled in a world far darker than he ever imagined. "Who is this E?" he asked, his voice sharp with a mix of frustration and fear. "The message I found. Who is it from?" Natalie hesitated, her gaze darting away from his. She seemed torn, as though revealing more would seal her fate. "It's from Marcus. He's been watching us. He wants something from me, Ethan. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm scared. He's going to make us pay for what's happened." Ethan's stomach churned. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a vice. His wife had been caught in a web of lies with no way out, but it wasn't just her anymore. He was in danger, too. They both were. The people Natalie had gotten involved with weren't the type to let things slide. If Marcus Landon and his connections were involved, it was only a matter of time before they came after him, too. "I don't know what to do, Ethan," Natalie said softly, her voice barely audible. "I'm trapped. I've made a mess of everything. I don't even know who I am anymore." Ethan stood there, his heart heavy with conflict. Part of him wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to demand answers for everything. But another part, small and buried under layers of pain, wanted to find a way to forgive her, to somehow reconcile this broken marriage. After all, they'd been through so much together. Could he really walk away from everything they had? But the truth gnawed at him relentlessly. Could he trust her again? "I don't know what to do either," he said, his voice hollow. "You've broken my trust, Natalie. And now I'm tangled in all of this. You've dragged me into something I never signed up for." Ethan couldn't remember when he had last felt so numb. The cool night air hit him as he stepped outside, but he barely registered the chill. His feet carried him aimlessly, one step following another without direction or thought. His mind was a storm of confusion, pain, and rage, each emotion crashing against the other like waves against jagged rocks. He wasn't sure how long he had walked, but eventually he found himself at the small park near their apartment, a place that once offered solace but now felt hollow. The swing set creaked in the wind, and the stillness of the night seemed to mock him. His thoughts swirled around Natalie, Marcus, the lies, and the secrets. Each piece of the puzzle felt like it was slipping further out of his grasp. But then, a thought pierced through the haze of his anger. Where the hell do I go from here? The question seemed almost absurd, as if the answer should have been obvious. But there was no easy path to follow now. His marriage, his life, everything he had built with Natalie. Was it worth salvaging? Could he ever trust her again? And more pressing than that, was he willing to risk getting tangled further in this mess with Marcus? He didn't know what kind of world his wife had entered, but it was clear it wasn't one that would let him go easily. Whatever hold Marcus had over her, whatever debts or favors she had accumulated, was something Ethan could never have anticipated. He pulled his phone from his pocket, staring at the screen for a long moment before scrolling through his contacts. He hesitated before tapping the name that had been on his mind for hours, Detective Cole. Ethan had known the detective for years. He'd worked with him on a few minor cases, nothing serious. But he had also heard the rumors about Cole's involvement with certain unsavory characters. It wasn't something he cared to explore, but he knew that if he wanted to get to the bottom of this, he needed someone with connections to the darker side of things, someone who could navigate the world Marcus lived in. The phone rang twice before Cole picked up. "Yeah?" Cole's gravelly voice echoed through the line. "It's Ethan. I need your help," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady, even though his pulse quickened. "I'm in a situation. My wife. She's in over her head with some people, and I need to know who they are. I need you to help me find out what I'm dealing with." There was a long pause on the other end. Ethan could almost hear Cole weighing his words. "What exactly are we talking about here? What kind of people are we talking about?" Cole finally asked, his tone cautious but curious. "Criminals. I don't know the details yet, but she's been involved with a man named Marcus Landon. I think she's been doing things for him, things that put both of us in danger," Ethan said, his voice tight with frustration. "Marcus Landon," Cole muttered, under his breath, and Ethan could practically hear the detective's mind turning. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up. This isn't something you want to play with, Ethan, but I'll help you. Let's meet tomorrow, all right?" Ethan agreed, hanging up the phone without much more conversation. He wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but he was past the point of wondering if there was a right choice. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The next day was a blur. Ethan didn't feel much of anything as he went through the motions, getting dressed, eating breakfast, even talking to Natalie on the phone briefly. She had left him a message earlier, her voice raw with emotion, begging him to come home. But he couldn't bring himself to face her yet, not after everything that had come to light. His meeting with Cole was scheduled for late afternoon, and by the time he arrived at the small diner where they'd agreed to meet, his nerves were on edge. The familiar smell of coffee and greasy food did nothing to calm his thoughts. Cole was already seated in a booth, a cup of coffee in front of him, his usual weary expression in place. The detective didn't look surprised to see him, just gave a single nod as Ethan sat across from him. "You sure about this?" Cole asked bluntly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Ethan. "I don't know," Ethan replied honestly. "I don't know what I'm walking into, but I need to know who I'm dealing with." "All right," Cole said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Marcus Landon isn't just some random businessman. He's tied up with a whole network of people, some legitimate, some not. He's been on the radar of local law enforcement for a while, but he's slippery, hard to pin down. If your wife's mixed up with him, she's in deep." Ethan listened intently, every word sinking deeper into his mind. "What do I do? How do I get out of this?" "You don't," Cole said flatly. "Not unless you cut ties completely. But be warned, that won't be easy. People like Marcus, people who operate in his world, they don't let go. And if they see you as a threat..." Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his world had shifted in ways he couldn't control. The more he learned about Marcus Landon, the more his marriage to Natalie seemed like a distant memory, like a life he no longer recognized. It was hard to reconcile the woman he once adored with the person who had chosen to become entangled with someone like Marcus. He couldn't see a way forward, not yet. His mind was too clouded with the murky waters of betrayal, lies, and the looming danger that hung over them. That night, Ethan returned home, unsure of how to face Natalie. She hadn't called him since their last conversation. The silence between them was suffocating. It was as if they were living in two separate worlds, and both felt equally fragile. As he walked through the front door, he saw her sitting on the couch in the dim light, her eyes red from crying, her body stiff with uncertainty. She looked up at him as he stepped inside, her face a mixture of hope and desperation. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, we need to talk." He stood there, frozen for a moment. The last time they'd tried to talk, everything had spiraled into accusations and half-truths. Was there anything left to salvage? He didn't know, but he walked toward her anyway. "Talk about what, Natalie?" His voice sounded colder than he intended, but the anger bubbling inside him couldn't be contained. "You've made your choices. I don't know what to say anymore." She winced at his words, but she didn't look away. She was shaking now, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I never meant for it to get this far," she said quietly. "I was scared. I didn't know how to get out, how to tell you everything. I didn't want to lose you." "Lose me?" Ethan repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. "You think I'd just let this go? Let you go? After everything? After you let him into our lives?" "I never meant for him to come between us. I swear. It spiraled. Marcus has a way of pulling you in. It's not like you think. It's complicated." "But She stopped, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something he wasn't sure he could offer. Ethan sat down across from her, a sharp breath leaving his lips. His mind raced as she spoke, but he couldn't form the words. His heart was too heavy, each beat filled with the weight of everything they'd lost. "You didn't just get caught up in something, Natalie. You chose this. You chose him over me," he said, each word a sharp slice of truth. "I never meant to hurt you," she pleaded, her voice softening as she reached out, her hand trembling. "I thought I was protecting you, protecting us. I was trying to manage everything. I wanted to keep you safe from everything that's been going on with Marcus and the people he's involved with." "Safe?" Ethan scoffed. "Is that what you're calling it? What do you think this is, Natalie? Some kind of game?" "I know I messed up," she said, her voice raw with guilt. "I never wanted to betray you, but when I saw everything going south with Marcus, when I realized the danger we were in, I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know how to fix it." Ethan's mind buzzed with confusion. How could she think she was protecting him by keeping secrets? How could she have been so blind, so willing to sink deeper into that world? "You could have come to me," he said quietly. "I would have helped you. We could have faced this together." "I know," she whispered, tears falling from her eyes. "I was just too scared. And then I thought, maybe if I just kept it under control, we could go back to the way things were. But now I see, everything's ruined. I ruined us." Ethan stared at her, unsure of what to say. He wanted to scream, to tell her how much this had broken him, how much he wanted to escape it all. But beneath the anger there was something else. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. A faint flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Love? Regret? Or perhaps the fear that without her, he would be lost. He stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Natalie." Her eyes widened, her face crumpling. "Please don't say that, please, She choked on her words, trying to stand up, but Ethan stepped back. "I can't trust you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't live in a world where you keep hiding things from me. Where you let this man, this monster, control us." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Natalie stood there, rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her face. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from the moment. He glanced down to see a text from Detective Cole. "I've got some info. Meet me at the usual spot in an hour. We need to talk." He didn't even think about it, just grabbed his jacket and turned to leave. "Natalie," he said quietly, pausing at the door. "I don't know what the future holds, but right now, I need to know what I'm dealing with." The cool night air hit Ethan like a slap as he stepped outside, the weight of the conversation still heavy on his chest. He could hear Natalie's desperate plea echoing in his mind, but his feet moved with a mind of their own, heading toward the familiar meeting spot, the dimly lit alley behind a coffee shop where he had met Detective Cole countless times before. As Ethan walked, the streets felt eerily quiet, the hum of the city swallowed by his thoughts. He didn't know what to make of the mess his life had become. Every step he took seemed to pull him further away from the person he used to be. How had he ended up here? How had his marriage crumbled so quickly? He reached the alley and found Cole waiting by the back entrance. The detective was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You're late," Cole said with a sharp glance, but there was no reprimand in his tone, just an acknowledgement of the tension that hung between them. Ethan didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to say. All he could think about was Natalie, sitting in their house, crying and pleading for forgiveness. But something told him that no amount of apologies or explanations would change what had already been done. "Let's just get to it," Ethan said, his voice strained. "What do you have?" Cole raised an eyebrow but didn't press for more details. He pulled out a folder from his coat and handed it to Ethan. "All of this," Cole began, "it ties back to Marcus Landon. His connections, they run deeper than we thought." Ethan opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Photos, reports, bank records, all pointing to the same unsettling reality. Marcus was more than just a man who had been involved with his wife. He was tied to organized crime, money laundering, and a whole network of people who had been pulling strings behind the scenes. The deeper Ethan dug, the more the lies and secrets piled up, and the more he realized just how far Natalie had gotten in over her head. "Shit," Ethan muttered under his breath, his mind reeling. "She didn't just cheat on me with him. She got caught up in something dangerous." "That's not all," Cole added, his voice lower now. "We've been tracking his movements, and there's something bigger happening. There's a hit scheduled. A deal's going down. It's all connected to your wife." Ethan's heart stopped. "A hit? What the hell are you talking about?" "She's involved," Cole said flatly. "Maybe not directly, but she's being used. We think she's been feeding information to Marcus. This isn't just about betrayal anymore. This is about survival." Ethan felt his stomach drop. He was already in too deep. He'd thought he was only battling Marcus for his marriage, but now it seemed like he was up against a much larger force, one that had the power to destroy everything in its path. "You have to do something," Cole said. "The clock's ticking. We need to get to her before things go too far." Ethan's mind raced. How could he save Natalie from this? How could he trust her when everything seemed like a lie? But beneath his anger, there was still a flicker of something, a desperate need to fix what was broken, to salvage the woman he had once loved. "I need to talk to her," Ethan said abruptly, looking up from the folder. "I need to hear it from her. I need to know if she was really involved in this, or if she's just a pawn in all of this mess." Cole nodded, his expression serious. "Be careful. She may not be as innocent as you think. And Marcus, he's not the kind of guy you want to underestimate." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to hear any more warnings. He already knew what was at stake. What was left of his life, his marriage, everything he had worked for, was crumbling faster than he could comprehend. He turned on his heel and headed back to his car, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Natalie had lied to him, betrayed him, and now he was staring down the possibility that she might have been part of something far darker than he had ever imagined. He didn't know what he would find when he went back to her, but one thing was certain: he couldn't let her go until he knew the full truth. When Ethan arrived home, the house was eerily silent. The lights were dim, and he could hear the faint sound of Natalie's sobs coming from the living room. His heart ached, but he knew he couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. Not this time. He stepped inside, his shoes clicking on the hardwood floors, and found her sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I swear I never meant for any of this. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know who to trust, who to turn to." Ethan's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to know everything. He had to hear her say it, no matter how much it hurt. "Tell me the truth, Natalie," he said, his voice low but firm. The silence between them stretched on, thick and suffocating. Ethan's mind raced, but his body remained still, as if frozen in the moment. Natalie's desperate gaze never left him, her expression a mix of pleading and hopelessness, like someone drowning and trying to grasp at the tiniest thread of salvation. Ethan wanted to speak, to shout, to demand answers. But his words felt trapped, swallowed by the weight of everything she had confessed. The air felt too heavy, every breath a struggle. "You've got to understand," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like you think. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought I could keep it all separate, keep you safe." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Safe?" His voice cracked, a bitter laugh escaping him. "You thought you could keep me safe? By lying to me? By getting involved in whatever mess you've gotten yourself into?" "I never wanted any of this to happen," she repeated, her voice raw with emotion. "Marcus is dangerous. He has control over everything. I thought I could just make it go away, that I could fix it before it got too far." Ethan stepped back, shaking his head. His mind felt like it was spinning in every direction at once, each thought a jagged edge threatening to tear him apart. He had always trusted her, believed in their love, but now all of it, everything they had built, felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he muttered, almost to himself. The truth of her betrayal sat like a lump in his throat. "You say you were trying to protect me, but from what? What kind of danger are we talking about, Natalie? What kind of people are we dealing with?" She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand. It's not just Marcus. There are others. People who have been watching us, manipulating things from the shadows. It's bigger than us." "Bigger than us?" Ethan repeated, his voice rising. "You've been lying to me. You've been sneaking around. And now you're telling me it's bigger than us? How much more are you going to keep from me?" He was pacing now, his movements sharp and erratic. He could feel his pulse racing, his chest tight, every nerve on edge. He wanted to scream, to throw something, but the reality of it all was too much to bear. He couldn't make sense of it. He didn't know where the truth ended and the lies began. "I'm sorry," Natalie choked out, tears spilling down her face. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen." Ethan turned to her, his voice low and dangerous. "Then why did you keep going? Why didn't you tell me sooner? You've been lying to me for how long, Natalie? How long?" She hesitated, her eyes shifting uncomfortably. I didn't know how to stop it. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could get out before you found out. But now I don't know if it's too late." Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps. He wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was some shred of honesty left in her, but the truth was too tangled, the lies too deep. His trust in her had been shattered, and no amount of apologies could repair what had been broken. "You've been involved in something dangerous, Natalie," he said, his voice steady now, though it felt like he was tearing himself apart with each word. "And I don't know how I can ever trust you again." She collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to lose you." Ethan stared at her, his mind warring between the woman he had loved and the reality of who she had become. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But he couldn't. Not when the weight of everything she had kept from him was still hanging in the air. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he whispered, his words like daggers in the silence. "I don't know if I can live with this." The words hung between them like a chasm, and for a moment neither of them moved. Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket, cutting through the stillness. He pulled it out, his hand trembling as he saw the name on the screen. It was Detective Cole. His heart sank, the timing too coincidental, too perfect. Without a word, he answered the call. "Ethan, you need to get to the office." Cole's voice was tight, urgent. "It's happening. Marcus and his people. They're moving in. You need to get to safety, now." Ethan's mind was spinning. He glanced at Natalie, who had stopped crying, her eyes wide with panic. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaky. "They're coming for us," Ethan replied, his tone dark and determined. "I have to go." Natalie's face drained of color. She stood up, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Ethan, no. Please. I can't lose you. I can't." Ethan backed away from her, the sudden fear and urgency cutting through the fog of his emotions. "I don't know what's going to happen, Natalie, but if you were involved in all of this,